Two ultra-scale micro RC trail trucks do battle across three grueling long-distance stages. Can my homebrew 1980 Jeep J10 keep up with this RC four-wheel drive-based Dodge Ram Charger? It's American Motors versus Mopar, SUV versus pickup, tiny tire versus extremely tiny tire, and of course built versus bought. Today we'll find out which rig can go the distance and see if my custom 4x4 is up to the challenge. Hello everyone and welcome! If you're ready to watch some of the least capable RC trucks on the planet go head to head, well you've certainly come to the right place. With these rigs, it's all about scale aesthetics rather than all-out off-road performance, though that doesn't necessarily mean these trucks are any less fun to drive. Put any RC vehicle in the right environment and there's plenty of fun to be had. These rigs aren't so much crawlers as they are functional models. As great events such as the Ultimate Scale Truck Expo and the Illuminati of Scale have shown, there's a whole subset of this hobby that's all about making 1/10 scale trucks as lifelike as possible, both with the appearance and performance. I'm attempting to do something similar here, only I'm using smaller scale plastic model kits as a base, with this strategy offering both some advantages and disadvantages when trying to create a very lifelike vehicle. Of course, if you've been following this channel for really any length of time, you'll know that this is something I've done numerous times prior with on-road vehicles, but going from a simple solid axle rear-wheel drive setup to something that's four-wheel drive and designed to go over rougher terrain introduces a number of challenges. I've had a lot of fun over these past few months both driving and improving the design of my own custom 4x4 chassis, which almost exclusively contains parts I've designed and 3D printed myself. Test by test, revision by revision, this thing is getting better and better with each trail run. But do I finally have something that can outperform and outscale a chassis simply purchased from a store? Well, let's find out. I figured before hitting the trails, it would make sense to give you all an overview of each of these rigs. I have showcased both of these vehicles in detail in some prior videos, which I'll be linking below in the description if you want to learn more, but in short, let's start with this 1980 Dodge Ram Charger. This body comes from a Revell plastic model kit that I built a few years back. It was quite easy to assemble and has a great scale appearance, though some modifications were required to allow it to fit the RC chassis. The biggest change was with the interior, which needed to be shortened quite a bit, though it's certainly better than not having any interior at all. I also had some fun designing and 3D printing a few simple accessories that could be added to the rear. A little bit of massaging around the wheel arches and adding some Velcro made it pretty easy to install onto this 1/24 scale RC four-wheel drive Trailfinder 2 chassis. When it comes to ready-to-run micro crawlers, this is probably about as scale as it gets, with an adjustable wheelbase allowing it to fit this Ram Charger body pretty well, though a little bit of trimming and some minor modifications were required. For those wanting something more lifelike and better proportioned than what you'll typically find with many other microcrawlers, the RC four-wheel drive Trailfinder 2 seems like a great choice. The included unlicensed Toyota pickup body was a bit toyish looking out of the box, though did show some nice molded detail. It was certainly a great candidate for some custom painting and accessories. Performance, however, especially with the $170 price tag, was underwhelming to say the least. And I'm not referring to this truck's inability to conquer the rocks, as that's obvious considering this truck's clearly targeted more towards the scale crowd with its realistic proportions and tiny tires. What I mean is that the included electronics were extremely underwhelming with very minimal torque, making slow-speed off-road driving difficult if not impossible. Quite disappointing on something that's clearly designed for the more hardcore scale crowd. You're essentially just flooring it to get over any obstacle. Not exactly ideal, especially considering the more premium price tag this rig was originally sold at. While of course aftermarket parts and custom modifications can greatly improve both the appearance and performance of this Trailfinder 2, I had my sights set on something a bit more ambitious. Instead of simply modifying this chassis, why not start with a clean slate and really go all out with the scale details? Enter this 1980 Jeep J10. Like the Ram Charger, this body comes from a 1/24 scale Revell plastic model kit. It even included a nice snowmobile to go with it. This was another great kit to put together and once again displays some nice lifelike details. I'm a huge fan of these older trucks, and the period correct vinyl graphics are just the icing on the cake. Where things are different though is what's underneath this detailed body. A fully custom designed and 3D printed chassis, better matching the drivetrain and suspension seen on the real thing. The motor is up front under the hood, transferring power to a divorce transfer case with an offset front axle. There's also leaf springs on all four corners. No four-links here, though there are some coil springs to offer a bit of assistance. It's been quite the process, to say the least, to get this chassis design to where it's at now. A process which I've documented in some prior videos, which again I'll be linking to below in the description if you want to go check them out. As crazy as it might seem to build something like this from the ground up, when there are so many micro crawlers, parts, and chassis available with just the swipe of a credit card, I've thoroughly enjoyed the process of refining this chassis and doing my best to make it better resemble the real thing, more so than just about anything else available on the market in this size. Of course, this is a chassis design that's really only suitable for building a stock or lightly modified replica of a real-world 4x4 vehicle. For anything that you would classify as a crawler, mud truck, or mega truck, the numerous other chassis available on the market will make a lot more sense for those types of projects. But for an authentic plastic model to RC conversion, I'm hoping this chassis proves to be at least a somewhat solid option. But with DIY parts this tiny, the challenge when driving isn't just making it over all of the terrain, but much like you would in the real world, you have to keep the vehicle alive too. Planning the route, positioning your wheels, and traversing obstacles in a slow, controlled manner all of a sudden becomes a lot more important with this Jeep. A couple of nice rigs that certainly look good sitting on the shelf, but it's time to get them out onto the trails and see how far they'll make it. Rather than running each truck through gates on a man-made course along a predetermined path, with greater ambitions for adventure and these, let's say, less than capable rigs, I decided to do things a little differently. What I did was set up 3 individual stages across several acres of land that I knew these rigs could handle. There's a defined start and finish, as well as some checkpoints that need to be visited along the way. As long as we start here, finish here, and arrive at each of the checkpoints, the exact path chosen is entirely up to us along the way. A point-to-point challenge, not a defined circuit. Stage 1 would be the shortest, easiest, and most straightforward, having relatively smooth dirt roads the whole way. A nice start to this expedition. What could possibly go wrong? Smooth sailing to checkpoint number 1, just as expected. While both of these trucks, especially the Jeep, might have a great looking appearance when standing still, you certainly don't get the lifelike performance in this size like you do with some of the larger 1/10 scale models. Certainly one disadvantage of these smaller scale rigs. I have gone ahead and slowed down a lot of the footage that you'll see in this video to help make these trucks look a bit more like the real thing. But obviously when the footage has not been slowed down, they're a little bit jerky and bouncy. With these trucks, you can get the appearance looking pretty close to the real thing, and in most ways on par with a lot of the larger scale RC models, but when it comes to replicating the real world performance, a larger size vehicle is going to be a lot easier to make look more lifelike, though of course that does come at a much greater cost. Like with anything, there's always going to be pros and cons to building vehicles in this scale. We're very fortunate to have access to many acres of terrain just like this, which is well suited for less off-road capable vehicles. Without the many scale miles of trails and open environments like this to drive on, I'd be a lot less interested in investing the time necessary to build vehicles like this. An RC vehicle isn't as much fun if you don't have good places to drive it. This can especially be the case on the opposite end of the spectrum with larger scale RC vehicles. You need plenty of space for them, and some public parks might not be too thrilled to see a gas-powered fifth scale tearing up the turf. Unfortunately, some hobbyists have unintentionally ended up with a rather large and expensive shelf queen. Despite stage 1, for the most part, being a simple Sunday drive, towards the end, things did get a bit more rocky, with the Jeep unfortunately suffering some damage. As you can see, one of the rear leaf springs became disconnected from the axle. Now I knew from the beginning that this would likely be a weak point, and I have since redesigned how the leaf springs mount to each axle, now using metal hardware rather than being pressed into place. That said, since the rest of the axle was just fine, I ended up simply gluing it to the leaf spring, and it's been holding up perfectly fine ever since. You know, I go on about how nice it is when you have a 3D printed RC chassis that you can easily and cheaply produce an unlimited amount of replacement parts for, but here I am still gluing stuff back together. Hey, until it breaks though, I'm not going to mess with it. Fortunately, we were very close to the end of stage 1, so despite the damage, the Jeep pulled through and made it all the way to the end. Wounded but unstoppable, at least so far. Looking past that little bit of damage, both trucks successfully completed stage 1, so after some minor repairs were made, it was on to stage 2. As you can see, this stage takes place in a more open area. It's also the longest due to the checkpoints being in sort of a zigzag arrangement. Because it's so open, we have a lot of different options on where to go. However, one thing we had not anticipated was this body of water right here. We had gotten a lot of rain prior to this trek, and as a result, this area in here was now a 1/24 scale lake, adding quite a bit of distance to our journey. Despite the severe lack of waterproofing, we really wanted to shave off some time, so we decided to cross at what appeared to be a shallow enough section. Fortunately, we made it through without anything getting fried, and continued the journey through the remaining checkpoints. In most ways, and probably as no surprise, the Ram Charger is more capable than the Jeep. This is primarily thanks to its higher stance and larger tires. The one advantage I noticed though that the Jeep does have over the Ram Charger is the axles have a bit more clearance due to their true 1/24 scale size. Notice how the differential housing is much smaller on the Jeep thanks to its smaller size gears, which not only somewhat better replicate the proportions seen on a real axle, but also help reduce the amount of times that these axles get stuck on rocks or sticks and other obstacles like what you see here. The Jeep also has a little better low speed control, though also has a much slower top speed. There's not a whole lot that the Jeep can really brag about as far as off-road capabilities, so you gotta take the wins where you can get them. Something required when driving the Jeep in particular is that you really need to be crouched down most of the time to get a better idea of the terrain that's in front of this truck. If you're just standing up and walking along like you would normally with a larger scale vehicle, inevitably you're going to get this thing stuck or caught up on something, and this rig is fragile enough that you can do some damage if you're not careful. A phrase that I remember hearing repeated at the Ultimate Scale Truck Expo is to drive scale. In other words, drive like you would a real truck. Well, okay, a real truck that you care about and maybe have to drive home after an afternoon out on the trails. Personally, I enjoy the challenge of driving more in this style, though obviously having to be this careful is not going to be to everyone's liking when it comes to operating an RC vehicle. At a certain point, if the RC addiction has gotten to you enough, you'll probably have a different vehicle for every style of driving, whether you want to go high-speed bashing or racing, or do some slow-speed super scale crawling. Speaking of slow speed crawling though, while it certainly took quite a bit of time to travel, well basically the equivalent of one end of a football field to the other, although by no means was it a very direct path, the end of stage 2 was getting closer. One rather intimidating obstacle still remained though, and that was this final hill. This maybe 8-foot give or take hill is a major shortcut for getting to the end of Stage 2, and I was really looking forward to seeing if the Jeep could make it. One thing that I knew would really hinder this Jeep's ability to climb would be its hard rubber tires, which were the ones included in the plastic model kit. Sure enough, about halfway up the hill, the Jeep encountered some issues, not just with traction, but with the drivetrain as well. Now unable to climb any further, it allowed the Ram Charger to be the only vehicle to conquer this stage on this day. There's no way I'm giving up just yet though. Back on the bench once again, it was time to make some repairs and do some upgrades. First on the agenda was repairing the spring. Unfortunately, this is one of the shortcomings of this steerable axle design. There's a risk of these springs that connect the inner and outer axles coming uncoiled, which is what happened here. It's something that I've been continuously experimenting with, trying to find a balance of having a stiff enough spring so that it doesn't uncoil like what you see here, while also being flexible enough to not overwork the steering servo. It's probably fair to point out that if I was a little better at doing this tiny soldering and getting everything lined up perfectly, that might help with things too, but I'm doing the best I can here. Now what ended up being a really big upgrade was this new set of tires. These are designed for use on 1/32nd through 1/35th scale or Landau crawlers, but the size perfectly matches this 1/24 scale Jeep J10 body since I'm wanting something close to OEM size tires. I wanted to stick with the period correct slotted mags, but I did design a new wheel that will better fit these tires. After 3D printing a prototype using an FDM printer, I then eventually used high detail resin for the final set. I applied a bit of paint and got everything put together. If you want to get the most out of this niche of the RC hobby, you really have to enjoy the process of building and improving a vehicle like this. A lot of patience, custom building, and trial and error is required to get everything working how you want, and it's important to understand the limitations of a vehicle like this. Obviously for me, I've thoroughly enjoyed the challenge, but I'm also thankful that there's so many great ready-to-run options available for all hobbyists, including those wanting something a bit less high maintenance. So far I gotta say that Dodge Ram Charger sitting on top of that RC 4-wheel drive chassis has had zero issues. It wasn't long though before this Jeep was ready to go back out there and give it another go. While it wasn't pretty, the Jeep did eventually make it up. However, as you may have noticed, there is a new problem. When repairing the front axle, I didn't get the ring gear properly aligned with the pinion, resulting in some serious slipping. Not ideal, but it has since been fixed, and fortunately I was able to complete this stage successfully, even if it took a couple tries. Stage 3, unlike Stage 2, actually started out more difficult and gradually got easier towards the end. A nice relaxing drive for the final stretch. Well, once again, at least I hope so. Originally, when mapping out these stages, I anticipated these rigs being capable of traveling roughly in a straight line along this ledge here. As it turned out though, such a direct path couldn't be taken, resulting in quite a bit more distance needing to be traveled, including going back down the hill that we went up on Stage 2. Although of course working with gravity rather than against it made this obstacle much easier to get past. Just have to make sure you're doing it on your tires and not your roof. I gotta say, it's really just a lot of fun to be outside and driving some RC trucks, even if this footage is not particularly amazing when just viewing it in a YouTube video like this. I guess like most things, it's a lot more enjoyable to experience rather than to just watch, though I guess if you made it this far in the video, you find it at least somewhat interesting, so hey, thanks for sticking with us. A lot of joy simply comes from driving a vehicle that you've built yourself, even if it might not seem all that impressive to an outsider. Not everyone can say that the rig is a true custom one-off design that they've built themselves, and there's a lot of satisfaction in that. But really, as long as you're getting out there and having fun, it doesn't matter what you're driving. Probably some of the most scenic shots were on Stage 3 towards the end, which I thought would be a nice way to conclude this epic expedition. I love all the small trees and plants in this area of the park that really pair nicely with these smaller scale vehicles. After hours of tiny trucking, we finally reached the end, concluding this epic 1/24 scale challenge. It may have taken a few tries, but we got there in the end. I'll consider that mission accomplished. Like I said, I've been really enjoying the process of tinkering with this Jeep and trying to strike a nice balance of performance, durability, and reliability while not detracting from the scale proportions and appearance of this custom chassis. At this stage, I'm really happy with where it's at, and I'm pretty confident that I've worked out most of the bugs. Of course, I'll be continuing to refine and improve the design where possible. I think at this point, what I have here is something that's good enough to post the STL files for others to 3D print and build themselves, but I do want to be extremely clear that this is definitely for a very specific kind of hobbyist. Somebody with access to the means of high-resolution 3D printing, able to solder the front axle together, very skilled when it comes to working with tiny and fragile parts, and someone crazy enough to look at the plethora of microcrawlers and chassis currently on the market and say, you know what, it's just not scale enough for me. It's got to use a plastic model kit, it's got to have the front mounted motor, it's got to have the divorce transfer case, and it's got to have that offset front axle. But hey, if you're that kind of person and want to do a proper solid axle 4x4 plastic model to RC conversion, I think you will enjoy this chassis design. Everything from smaller CJ Jeeps to full-size pickups. I'm definitely tempted to do an independent front suspension version if possible, not so much to necessarily do a modern pickup truck or a high-speed desert racer or anything like that, but I was thinking more so to replicate some of the older mini trucks from the 70s through the 90s. I've seen some cool Nissan and Toyota kits that I think would be awesome for an RC conversion, as well as maybe a first-gen Chevy S10 if I can find one of those kits for a reasonable price. I know there's been quite a few requests to see a similar chassis design for two-wheel drive trucks. Not only would that be doable, but it would actually be easier than this 4x4 setup. I'll probably make it happen at some point, although personally I'm not sure I'd enjoy a two-wheel drive truck quite as much, since I wouldn't be able to take it out to a park like this and go over some of the quote-unquote rougher terrain like I can with this 4x4 Jeep. That said, a tow truck or shop truck would definitely be cool. I have done a lowered street truck type build previously with that 76 Chevy Stepside using our FPUC1 chassis. I was really happy with how that turned out, and I definitely recommend you check out that build series if you haven't already. That project worked out great with that chassis, but if you wanted to do more of an OEM type build or like a tow rig, none of these on-road chassis that we have currently would really be ideal for that. But hey, I could talk about ideas all day long, but I do want to make clear that I would really only recommend this setup for replicating either a bone stock or very lightly modified 4x4 vehicle, as anything more than what you see here with this Jeep is going to make much more sense to build using a much more established and durable platform like an SCX24 or an Orlando chassis. If you can find one of these 1/24 scale RC 4-wheel drive Trailfinder 2 chassis for a good price and are willing to do a few upgrades, particularly to the suspension and electronics to help this rig reach its full potential, it's a great option for a custom build. And it's closer to a true 1/24 scale size, which will make it possible to do some plastic model to RC conversions, like I did here with this Ram Charger. Now, I haven't posted any STL files for this chassis at the time of posting this video. This is just more of an update, and I guess a hey look what I did this past weekend. But it is something I'll be working on in the near future. Currently, I'm busy with some updates and some new parts for the CTC01 chassis. Be sure to stay tuned for more on that. Eventually though, I'll be putting together a nice tutorial and some STL files for this 4x4 chassis, and you all can let me know what you think. For anyone who's as crazy as I am, I think you're really going to enjoy this chassis. Of course, I'll also be doing some more builds using these components in the near future. Stay tuned for those videos. I'm very excited to be doing some more plastic model to RC conversions with this same level of detail, or perhaps even better than what you see here with this Jeep. In the meantime though, for all the builders out there, we do have some other chassis designs and parts available on our website and Patreon if you're interested in doing an on-road project. Of course, there's plenty of builds here on this channel showcasing vehicles using those chassis. I had a ton of fun putting together today's video, and I hope you all enjoyed watching. As always, if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, and stay tuned for more. I of course want to give a huge thanks to all of our Patreon supporters and channel members for helping to make these videos possible and getting themselves access to some exclusive perks. But that's all I've got for today's video. As always, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.